So today, for this hour, we'll have an introduction first to the BioAgora project. Then we'll have a quick presentation on the work that has been done through the BioAgora project on identifying capacity development needs at the Science Policy Interface for biodiversity. And then a short presentation on the proposal for the pilot training. And hopefully we'll have a bit of time for discussion. Most important, the idea will be to collect your questions and comments, and we will use that as a frequently asked questions that we will afterwards also answer, so that the people who are not with us can also see what can be the key questions and answers on the pilot training. Before we go into the first presentation, I wanted to take the opportunity to have just one quick survey to see who is in the room with us, and to have a quick question to you. You should be able to see the survey, who is in the room. And my question to you is, what is your main activity? And I highlighted main, because many of you have several hats. But basically, what do you spend most of your time on? Is it producing knowledge, being a scientist? Is it working at the interface? So not so much producing the knowledge, but translating it, being part of some networks, maybe moderating some events, and so on. Are you a policymaker working at the level of policy development and implementation? And other, for anything else that you might be involved in. So I give a bit of time. I have about 45 people in the room. So I'm waiting just a little bit to see what comes out. Okay. Maybe if you don't see the survey because you're joining through a browser, you can also add in the chat whether you are a scientist, science policy interface actor, or a policymaker, in case you don't see the survey. Okay. Still a little bit of some people haven't answered yet, but we see from the I'm going to share the results in a minute. Okay. Okay, I think you see the results, right? So what you see is most of our participants are either scientists or science policy interfacer, and we have 3 people representing the policy-making world. Okay, we'll discuss that a little bit. We also have the issue that today was a school holiday in Belgium, and that there is also some activities in different in the European Commission. So that's also maybe why we have not as much participation for the policy making side. Okay, so I'm just going to stop this activity on the survey. And we are going to have the first presentation. I'm going to ask Marie van der Waal, one of the co-coordinators of BioAgora, to share a presentation and take the floor for 10 minutes.
So good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, everyone, depending on where you are while listening to us. So my name is Marie van der Waal, and I'm actually a plant ecologist by training. I did my PhD on the long-term impact of land use on biodiversity, but I moved more into a science policy interface about 15 years ago. And now I'm a senior scientist at the Helmholtz Center for Environmental Research, also called UFZ in Leipzig, Germany, where I'm leading a research team on biodiversity science policy interface. And in the context of this webinar, as Estelle introduced me, I'm one of the 2 scientific co-coordinators of the project BioAgora, which I am very happy to present you today. So, of course, it needs to work as well. So what is BioAgora? So BioAgora is a Horizon Europe project which started in 2022 and will last until June 27. It is a very particular, a unique Horizon Europe project in the sense that it is mandated directly by the European Commission to be building a multifunctional biodiversity science policy interface, including the development of the Science Service for Biodiversity. And the Science Service for Biodiversity is meant to become the scientific pillar of the European Commission Knowledge Center for Biodiversity, also called KCBD. In other words, we are aiming to set up a one-stop shop between any knowledge needs from Commission services and the knowledge community. And during BioAgora time, we need to ensure that this new science policy interface will be self-sustained. And the ultimate vision of the science service is to ratcheting up or improving the implementation of any biodiversity commitment, starting during the project time with ratcheting up the biodiversity strategy for 2030. So as I don't know how many of you have heard about the KCBD, I will say a few words about it. So the Knowledge Center for Biodiversity is one of the 20 knowledge centers set up by the European Commission. This one is hosted by the GRC. The European Biodiversity Strategy for 2030 was already mentioning the need of creating this knowledge center. And it was then launched at the EU Green Week in October 2020 as one of the first implemented action of the EU biodiversity strategy. It has many objectives. The first one is to help tracking and assessing progress toward the EU biodiversity strategy. It also fosters cooperation and partnership. And last but not least, it also underpins policy development with scientific, technical, and practitioners' advice. As KCBD don't have access to all the knowledge produced, which could support policies, they will need the support from external actors and therefore the need to create the scientific pillar under the form of the science service that BioAgora is setting up. So, as I said, BioAgora is a unique project also because it is not a one-stand EU project. It represents the legacy of a long series of EU projects, EU initiatives, actors that were put in place, and the concretization of decades of ideas and vision on why and how to improve the science policy interface on biodiversity in Europe. So I don't have time to detail this long and winding and very visionary road of the interface, but the message is that along this road, the European Commission, the Scientific Committee, and the Science Policy Interface have set up key actors, key processes, also key policies to keep improving the ways decisions impacting biodiversity are made. And BioAgora is there to improve the orchestration of those existing actors and initiatives. So also important, those more than 2 decades of research and practice in science policy interface have led to the identifications of key gaps that need to be addressed at the interface. So all this led to the identification of a need for services which the Science Service for Biodiversity needs to provide to a range of communities. So to the knowledge holder community, to the policy community, to the science policy interface communities, but also to society. And ultimately, all leading to the setup of science service at the service of biodiversity. If you want to understand a little bit more the diversity of services that we are aiming for, please have a look at our website. So BioAgora has 4 main goals during the project duration. The first goal is to orchestrate and assess existing science policy interface networks and actors. So again, this is based on the legacy of work that was done before, but we really need to understand who are the actors and how best to orchestrate them. The main entry point to be co-developing this science service is through setting up and engaging in our demonstration cases. Demonstration cases act as a knowledge exchange platform between science, policy, and society around a specific theme. So they are platforms around which we are testing the potential functions of the future biodiversity science policy interface, so the future science service. And at the moment, we have 7 demonstration cases, like the marine demonstration cases, the freshwater, the nature-based solution, the pollination, multifunctional landscape, transformative change, and the scenario and modeling demonstration cases. What you have to know is that, of course, they are ongoing, but all existing demonstration cases are already directly linked to commissioned services, such as the EUBP, so the European Biodiversity Platform from DG Environment, and all its subgroups. For example, the demonstration cases on pollination as representatives in the subgroup pollinator, or the demonstration cases on NBS in the subgroup green infrastructure and restoration. So, as you can imagine, the theme of the demonstration cases are broad, like freshwater is quite broad. And in the lifetime of the project, it will be challenging to support every network that composes theme that could support developing the science service. And our starting point in BioAgora is to test whether we can contribute to improving the implementation of the biodiversity strategy. So for this, we are testing our potential functions with networks that can impact the implementation of the biodiversity strategy, like in this example of the freshwater demonstration cases, where the demonstration cases has the aim at the moment, at the beginning, of contributing to build a transformative network of science policy society actors having an impact on restoring the 25,000 kilometer target of free-flowing rivers, which ultimately aims to contribute to implementing target 11 of the biodiversity strategy, but also other policy, like, for example, the nature restoration law, hopefully. So these demonstration cases has now identified 7 challenges for effective implementation of the biodiversity strategy. It is now working on a transformative process to assess research priorities that address real-world societal challenges. The third goal is to, of course, naturally, to extract lessons learned from our demonstration cases that are testing the potential function, and in order to develop a fair, functional, and transformative science service for biodiversity. We have so far identified 3 overarching functions that include a long list of support functions in order to ensure to have a transformative science policy interface. And I will say that the core one is for sure will happen is the answering answering request support function, sorry. Another overarching function is to create and support active thematic network, and all of this is embedded into a function of transforming processes within and between science and policy. So to ensure this development of this fair and functional science service, of course, we have a business plan that reflect on the governance structure and which actor, most probably already existing, will be able to support the science service in the future, and so on. And you are more than welcome once we have the call for joining the business plan group to ask us for a question in case. And last but not least, because it is in the frame that this webinar and future pilot training was developed, BioAgora contributes also to promote capacity building and co-learning processes for co-developing an inclusive and functional science policy interface for biodiversity. But I'm not gonna say more than this teaser, because Kata and Carmen are going to tell you everything about this goal. And Yeah, and if you are interested to join us to co-develop a European Science Policy Interface that will work for you, we have different ways to get engaged. So just have a look at our website, where we let you know on how to engage in our existing demonstration cases, how you can co-develop and pilot new demonstration cases, how you can join the Biodiversity Knowledge Agora, how you can contribute to answering policy requests, and all in all, just subscribe to the BioAgora newsletter and our mailing list to ensure that you receive all invitation to all our events and activities. And with this, I thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Marie. Can you stop sharing the presentation? Okay. I think we can have the question, if you have questions, within the chat. And then at the end of the presentations, Marie and Kata and Carmen and myself will answer the different questions that we are collecting. So I'm going to switch now to the next presentation around the capacity development needs analysis and work that has been done in Work Package 5. And I will ask Kata, maybe you're presenting. I think it's Kata who is next. You can share, I think.
It's me. I'm going to start the presentation, but Kata is sharing the presentation.
Okay, sorry about that. So Carmen, can you also introduce yourself and share your, Kata, can you share the presentation? I think it's working now, right? Yes, perfect, sorry.
Yes, okay, so welcome everyone. We are researchers from ESSRG, the Environmental Social Science Research Group based in Budapest, Hungary. And we are working on the BioAgora project. My name is Carmen Zett and my colleague is Kata Fodor. We both have a background in social science and we are focusing on biodiversity conservation and food-related research. In the next 10 minutes, we will briefly present the capacity development needs of SPI stakeholders we have identified during the one-year research for the BioAgora 5.1 deliverable. For this, we have conducted expert interviews, desk research, questionnaire, and expert workshops. We delivered the report in January, and we'll share it with you in the chat after the presentation so you can read the full report. So the first question is, how do we interpret capacities in the case of the science service? To be transformative, science policy interfaces should shift from linear processes to a knowledge co-production model. Therefore, stakeholders need capacities to effectively participate in the SPI, that is, capacities to take part in knowledge co-production. By co-production capacities, we mean capacities to create, access, interpret, and apply scientific and research-based knowledge, and capacities to combine science with existing localized knowledge, practices, and governance to affect change. These include personal skills and competencies, as well as institutional conditions. For example, financial or other types of resources, structures, and processes. On this slide, you can see that we've created a systematic framework to address emerging capacity needs, sorting them into categories based on whether they concern individual skills or organizational characteristics. Positioned at the bottom of this framework are its resultant products, that is data, knowledge, and research. Above that, we have individual skills marked with lighter green, such as communication, diverse values and worldviews, policy literacy, and personal time management. Then, capacity needs that involve both personal abilities and organizational setup, marked with darker green, that are inter- and transdisciplinarity, competencies to co-produce knowledge, relevance, and funding. Further up in the azure layer, capacity needs that require changes only in the organizational structure or characteristics, such as bringing people together, inclusion, reliability, transparent decision-making, harmonized timelines, and institutional support. The outer layer represents the broader context, including the vested interests of power dynamics and the complexity of science and nature in general. Although these are not strictly capacities, these contextual aspects have been built into the framework due to their frequent mentions by experts. Needs across these layers are often interrelated, so addressing them together could be more effective than focusing on solely just one. By tackling interconnected needs spread across different levels, we can trigger a transformative change throughout the whole system. On this slide, this figure shows that different SPI actors have different capacity needs. Therefore, we have to pay very close attention to these differences. However, what is worth highlighting is that communication and bringing people together are in the top 3 needs of both scientists and policymakers. And I give the word to Kata.
Right, thank you. So we looked at capacity needs of SPI stakeholders, not only according to the different thematic areas, or not only according to the different actors, but also according to the different thematic areas or demonstration cases. And what we found is that needs differ not only according to the actors, but also according to these scientific areas. And this is rather significant because it means that in order to take effectively part in SPIs, the capacity of different actors in different scientific areas and different scientific fields need to be built in specific ways, so they need to be addressed in specific ways. So considering the 18 capacity development needs that we identified in this report, we could also observe that many of them have already been reported in earlier studies, and that there are a number of existing initiatives that aim to address these capacity needs. So in this report or in this research, we also screened these existing capacity development initiatives in relation to all the DCs. And we found 2 main things. One of them is that most of these initiatives target researchers or practitioners in the natural sciences, and much less frequently social scientists or people from the humanities. And they are rather rarely tackle or address policymakers or aim to help policymakers. The second conclusion that we drew is that these existing initiatives tend to be rather general in nature. So they include, for example, these massive open online courses or MOOCs, webinars, online guidelines, lots of online seminars and courses like this, which are generally open to anyone who is interested, and they're not very well targeted to meet the specific needs of these diverse actors. Opportunities are also often lacking for researchers and policymakers to directly engage with each other in a more sort of sustained conversation. So one of the main goals of this pilot training would be to provide a collaborative space to transform these usual science policy interactions while targeting several capacity needs, both at the personal and the institutional levels. The goal is to cultivate a new cohort of boundary spanners, so skilled researchers and policymakers who know both worlds and who are also skilled to engage with societal actors. Boundary spanners would then be also able to work well in boundary organizations, for instance, in intergovernmental science policy initiatives or in national policy labs, or just work more productively in their own organizations or in academia. This pilot training would allow participants to build their skills in a more holistic manner, but also meet their specific needs. For example, in the freshwater DC, we found that stakeholders often express their need for greater dialogue, for more collaborative spaces and regular exchange with others, where not only decision makers and researchers could work together, but they could also work with civil society organizations or practitioners such as hydropower representatives, etc. So these collaborative efforts could address needs related to bridging diverse values and worldviews, bringing people together, inter and transdisciplinarity, inclusion, or the enhancement of competencies to co-produce knowledge, among some other needs highlighted here. I won't go into details about these needs, or I won't you can read about them, but for the sake of time, maybe I will skip this part. If you are interested in the details of this research, we will include the whole report in the chat, so you can read more about it, and you can get the details about the DCs as well. And if you have further questions about the study, you can also email us these email addresses. And now I think I can give the word back to Estelle.
Thanks a lot. Thanks to you. Thanks a lot to both of you for this this very interesting presentation. It's actually really important to have this framing, and I'm going to explain now from what has been identified as capacity needs and recommendations from the work in the work package 5, D5.1 deliverable that you can access later on. We have chewed on that and tried to make a proposal of a pilot training. So I'm going to share now my screen. Okay. So can you see it? Yeah. Okay. So the idea really, sorry. So it's working, yeah. The idea really is to move from the what has been identified as capacity needs, try to have that as a pilot experience. We basically, what has been identified is the fact that you do have a lot of trainings on science policy interface for different subjects, including environmental issues. But those trainings usually target more people who are working in the science arena or at the science policy interface. You only have very few trainings which target together policymakers and scientists. So the idea here for the BioAgora Science Policy Interface pilot training is to try to address this aspect. We developed this proposal by engaging consulting with an advisory committee where you had representatives from current and previous science policy interfaces, including the alternate summer schools, including representatives who work in IPBES. We also had representatives from the policy making world and from the science, from scientists as well. We had about 15 people involved in the discussion. So the main goal of the pilot training is actually to put together policymakers and scientists. We will have, of course, a focus on some content. So you would have 2 levels of learning. A content related to biodiversity as a transversal topic, as a wicked problem, as we tend to say nowadays, and a second level of learning, which is more around what has been presented by Kata and Carmen, around developing the mutual understanding, looking at the tough questions. How do you address uncertainty? What are the skills to work at the interface between science and policy? How do you actually do cross-sectoral work? Where is the scientific evidence role in this process? So you have those 2 different levels of learning. And then BioAgora would like to use this pilot to extract some blueprints, some guidelines, where you would have afterwards some other co-organizers who can actually also organize those kind of trainings and build a long-term community of what we call the boundary spanners, and eventually even set up a think tank process. So really this pilot has both ways. It's for the people who participate a great experience to reflect upon their own activities, how they work together with policymakers and scientists together, reflecting, and then also this aspect of the sustainability of what this kind of training could trigger for a long-term perspective. I wanted to reference back the fact that we are going to also look at things that are somehow a lot talked about for a long time in the science policy interface: better communication, how to break silo thinking, how to address complexity, diverse values and worldviews. Nothing really new, I think, for most of you. But at the same time, what's interesting is that we would like to propose different ways of looking at that, and especially have participants, policymakers and scientists discuss together and take the time to do it, so that there are some ways to transform the capacities at the science policy interface at different levels. We will use a case study that is related to the freshwater demonstration case in BioAgora, that is also connected to the IBES assessment on the nexus of biodiversity, water, food and health. The idea is to take a case study around freshwater multi-uses, to have something that is wicked, that is challenging, where you have to have a multi-sectoral approach, where you have to have different disciplines involved, where you have tough questions around working with uncertainty, working with different perspectives. We will look also into the social and economic aspects that are related to this case study. And the idea is to have a case study that is illustrating the challenges at the science policy interface for the participants to explore concretely with some questions. How do you scope a question related to policy relevant issues at European, national and local level? How do you get scientific evidence involved in this conversation? How do you tackle the values and different worldviews in policy implementation from European to local level? I mean, tough questions will be addressed. We will use some different tools, and I'm not going to go into details, but the idea is to anchor in what we call co-learning methodologies. So it's not experts telling people, teaching people methodologies. It's about the participants building on their own experiences and reflecting on each other points of view and finding common grounds to build new ways. So it seems very ambitious, and it is. It's targeting some audiences. We hope to have a call for interest launched after this webinar. We would like to have 10 policymakers from various sectors relevant to the case study. And we will have also 10 scientists. The idea is to have this group together. The main challenge and question is for both communities and participants. We are actually aiming for an in-person training, not an online one, and taking quite some time, 5 days. And why? I'll come back to that a bit later, but this is really about changing the way we are working. And we are convinced that you don't change with a few hours online, that you need to have the real interpersonal exchanges and to take the time. So for the policymakers, I have a lot of empathy, because this will be a challenge, and it will be also for scientists, but policymakers taking 5 days to reflect on their job, to work with others, to find ways to improve this engagement with science, it's ambitious. And I hope that some will see the added value of taking 5 days in 365 days to join this very transformative process and explore with others, with scientists, how to make the best of the relationship and gain time on the long term, build a network that will be supportive for them. Same thing from the scientist perspective. It will also be a challenge to take this time. Usually scientists, they are also willing to engage with policymakers for increasing their understanding. And so that's what we would like to do, is to have this moment where policymakers and scientists, they understand each other. They see the challenges and constraints, and they explore together ways to overcome those obstacles, and also anchor that into some real concrete questions around this case study that we're proposing. give you some idea a little bit more on the process we are proposing, okay, as a co-learning process. It will be in 4 steps, okay? The idea is to have time where both communities explore their respective challenges, taking the case study as illustration, digging into what's happening right now, okay? We will have some exercises to also have a chance to explore from the other perspective, take my shoes, exchange on that. We'll have what we call the confronting reality, which will be a one-day meeting with local stakeholders, because it's an in-person training that will take place in a certain territory and will engage with stakeholders on the case study, so that you have this reality check also and involvement with other actors than just policymaking and policymakers and science. Then we'll have a third step around pushing the limits. What does that mean? Well, once you have had the experience of the challenges, the contacts and the exchanges with stakeholders, looking at how you can transform science policy interface ways right now, coming from your own view on what is in your control from both sides, together finding maybe innovative ways to address some of the questions that would have been raised through the previous days. And the last one would be to make that sustainable, so that you have a work that is done with 20 people. We hope that this will trigger within these people some changes in their way of working. Between the people, some changes in their interactions and building the trust to keep going with this interaction. But as these people could be, how they could be also champions for this change on the long term and building this community that BioAgora is aiming for. Giving a little bit more on the process, and you have access to the concept note that we have developed, but I wanted to explain a little bit that you will have work on the case study to pinpoint to highlight the issues, to highlight the tough questions. It can be around, it will be around how do you scope questions? How do you take in consideration the cross-sectoral approaches? I mean, policies are developed usually in a much more sector-based way. So how do you do on the ground with this implementation that requires to work with different sectors? We'll have some inspiring talks. So it will not be experts giving solutions. It will be experts challenging the participants in their views around different aspects. Those inspiring talks are still in discussion, but it gives you some ideas of what type of talks we would like to have. We will have a day where we will meet stakeholders. The case study will be anchored in a territory. It will be in the Drome River Valley, which is where I live. And it's also why it's there. It's because I'm going to use my network of stakeholders. I work in local participatory processes with stakeholders around different environmental issues. It's a territory where you have still a free-flowing river, but you have a lot of different conflicts around the use of this river, addressing also climate change, because this is a place where droughts have been quite important. So we'll be using this real case with real stakeholders to confront the discussion on science policy interface. And then we'll have a moment where we also go, tackle some of the issues that people don't usually tackle, like our biases, values, and identities. How do we deal with conflicts? The idea nowadays is, okay, let's have a participatory process. Well, is it a magic solution? Do we actually have to look at different aspects of that? Also, looking at what has been done on confronting different sectors. There are a lot of work between biodiversity, food, and water, and we'll get some input on that as well. And then the last part will be on building the community, exploring how to make sustainable the transformative learning that will have happened for the past days, and how to make that also something that is inspiring for others. We will work with strong rules. The idea is really to have a safe space, and I'm highlighting that because we value interpersonal exchanges. We want to move away from the post-COVID, like speed up online, in some kind of a feeling of disconnection, and at the same time we have never been more in like always meetings and so on. We want to value a different way of working, a way where people take the time to think together. This requires confidentiality, empathy, respect, and a commitment to be there. I am convinced that the ones who will join will not regret it. This is 5 days. It's scheduled for the end of September in Drome. It's 4 hours and 30 minutes direct train from Brussels. It's a very well-connected place, and it will be something that has not been done before. So it's taking a risk for us, for you, and we are really looking forward to that, to hopefully make a real transformative change pilot training on Science Policy Interface for Biodiversity. Thanks a lot for your attention. I will stop sharing now my screen. And for the last 10 minutes, it's going to be challenging to have an open conversation all together. But what I would like you to do is first think a little bit on some questions, okay? Some reflections, some comments. And you can share that through the chat, okay? Because what we would like is, because we have such a short time, what we would like is really to develop from your questions, maybe a frequently asked question section that will go with this recording of the webinar, and that we can also share our answers with the wider community. Okay, so basically we use you as a way to get those questions you have, and we'll answer that also after the webinar. I will try to answer some questions with my colleagues now, but the idea is also to have this opportunity to share afterwards some of the question and answers, okay? So I let you go through your thinking, share some questions in the chat. I will ask my colleague Alan Watt from Alternet, who is one of the conveners of one of the great transformative experience Alternet summer schools, to help me a bit with the questions, and also my other colleagues, Kata and Carmen and Marie, to check also the chat to see a little bit some of the questions we have. We'll try to answer maybe some that we see are like coming on a regular basis. Okay, so yes, Alan, did you check some questions already?
Yeah, there are a lot of good points from Per, and apologies, Per, because I'm not very good at pronouncing your second name. And the one or two have been answered already. There's a nice point, controversial point, about policymakers may be smart but often not educated enough. And I'm glad to see that Brooke Wilkerson pointed out that scientists need education as well, maybe more so. But he makes a good point in relation to the discussions about evidence, the evidence base. And I don't know whether you would want to comment on that, Estelle, but can I just, so that they need not just to think about options, but to take options that policymakers have and discuss the evidence base for that. And I guess that it would be at the heart of a lot of the discussions between policymakers and scientists. And can I, and I've got a second one after that. Estelle, do you want to respond?
So on how to make evidence-based policy? Well, the whole point of the training is to have this reflection between policymakers and scientists to move away from the myth we're just hearing, that the policymakers are not smart, or that they have an agenda, they only want evidence for their agenda, that the scientists on their side, they are like trying to feed in these expectations, but this is a one way, and how do you do that? Well, there are a lot of, I would say, prejudices, and scientists and policymakers, to make the best of what science can provide to help the policy processes, you need to know better what's happening from both sides, to understand the challenges that each community is facing, to understand how to go over those challenges. But you cannot do that if each community stays in its own realm and just hope for the other ones to understand each other, to understand them. You know, it's a bit a relationship issue. If you have a relationship that's not working as well as it could, it cannot be just one side, you know, trying to convince the other, or it cannot be one side waiting for the other to change. It has to happen as a dialogue. Otherwise, it will never move away from some trying to meet the needs of the other and some waiting for something that's not happening. I don't know if I...
Yeah, thanks, Estelle, and I'm sure Per will come back to you if that wasn't completely satisfactory. He's also making some other interesting points about empathy, and I'm afraid I don't agree to the other point, which is that it's a personal characteristic that cannot be learned, because there are some really good courses on empathy. There's a nice point though from Christian, which actually opens things out a little bit and talks about the need to engage stakeholders and citizens. And I think that is very much part of your thinking in relation to the pilot and the future to involve stakeholders. Do you want to say something about that still?
Yeah, well, the idea was to have a moment where in the pilot training, you move from like theoretical discussions, or maybe not so theoretical, but like, you know, like those questions that are coming from policy and from science, to actually the reality of stakeholders in the field. So for one day, we'll take participants meeting like farmers who have tried to adapt their agricultural practices in the face of climate change with restriction on waters. We will meet also local authorities trying to manage conflicts by implementing different policies that are not always compatible in the field. We will meet with conservation and restoration project managers who are also trying to change ways nature conservation and restoration is done. We will look into meeting also with, I would say, the change makers. Okay, the Drome River Valley has this interesting identity that a lot of initiatives have been tried in the past decades to change ways in terms of agriculture, but also water use, but also engagement of citizens in conservation. And a lot of those issues will be illustrated with those stakeholders. And I think it's interesting to see that if you move away and you exchange with stakeholders, their views are really challenging and at the same time very inspirational for the work.
Thank you, Estelle. There's a nice comment from, apologies for my pronunciation, from Gilles, I think, if I got it right. With our main tip, policymakers have no time to read 100-page scientific reports. Well, the fact is that scientists don't either. And with a publishing industry that's actually prioritizing more and more publications, I think both scientists and policymakers have got a huge problem there. There's Colin Hindmarsh, I can't resist but read this out because it's so true. Many of the interactions mentioned in the presentations have been in place for some time. Absolutely correct. but he says it seems though that you are moving from an adversarial approach to environmental planning and management to one of cooperation and comprehensive inclusion, a brave, radical and much needed approach to the way we do things. So
well, thank you for this comment. Yeah, you know, I see a lot of questions. I see a lot of aspects that are like, okay, well, the policymakers should do better. We don't have to basically they are paid to do better. But honestly, having worked with a lot of policymakers, I think it would be really nice to have a time so that the scientists who think that this is all the fault of the policymakers and the policymakers who feel very frustrated because the science is not providing what they need, that they meet and see that actually it's much more of a shared endeavor. And I've seen a lot of views that are, okay, I do my best, the others have to do their best, and that's it. Well, it has to come from both sides. I agree that a lot of trainings are right now targeting scientists because there are some blockages that are identified around more efficient communications, like how you digest the scientific knowledge so it's usable. But even that, I mean, it doesn't happen without having this moment where some people will have to use this knowledge. And I mean, it cannot be used if it's not also developed in a way that's matching the needs of who is supposed to use it. And that's exactly where we are. It's I think it's a very interesting moment in the science policy interface, especially for biodiversity as a wicked problem, like climate change, but especially biodiversity, because if we miss the turn, we'll keep going with like missing targets and missing goals. Whatever we keep having every 10 years, we'll keep missing them. This has to become an alliance. And our little contribution as BioAgora is to offer this opportunity to try it. It's a crash test. Maybe it will not work, but at least we try. And this is very courageous from this project to do it, I have to say.
Absolutely. I guess time is running out. Can I squeeze in two questions? Two questions together, because Gabriella asks if there would be any tangible results expected after the 5-day training. And Brooke then, and I think in relation to that, asks, could you say more about your long-term hopes, plans and visions, and perhaps for the network that would grow out of this, and related to that, how you envisage going from the personal change to institutional change?
Yeah. So there are three main outputs that we think would come out of the pilot training. The first output, we will have for the participants will have some kind of a worksheet process, so that they are capturing their evolution in their questions, working on the case study, but also in their own practices. So they have this output for themselves. And then we are aiming also to have a lesson learned document extracted from the pilot training, so that this feeds into a blueprint for further trainings. I mean, BioAgora is about sustainability, okay? And the idea is that from this test, we have some kind of a blueprint of SPI trainings for policymakers and scientists that can be taken up, and that there are some co-organization with other actors at different levels. You could imagine at a national level, people joining with BioAgora and in another training doing it themselves to tackle a specific case study in their country, for example. It's really this kind of lessons learned output that we hope will also trigger this domino effect. And the last output is really in relation with the freshwater demonstration case, because from what will have been discussed on the case study, which is around freshwater multi-uses, we'll have some policy brief, science policy brief, that will extract some of the main learning aspects that came out of the process, okay? And that will be taken by the freshwater demonstration case in BioAgora to feed into the conversation.
Thanks, Estelle. Could I make a couple of bring to everybody's attention a couple of the other points in relation to, there's a question about scale, and I think that if I could just say that the scale of policymaking process, we're looking both at the European and national scale. And a nice point from Michelle, which if I would summarize it, is the danger that this call only goes out to those scientists who are particularly interested already in the science policy interface, and there's a real need to go broader than that.
Yes. The way we're going to do it, and it's a good thing because it's the next step, so I wanted to touch upon that. We'll open some call for interest for participants from the policy side will be European and national, and from the scientific side, it will be also across disciplines, but we'll have a selection process. So we, from people who apply to join the training, we'll try to balance. So there is a good representation of different sectors, different types of policymakers, and different science disciplines as well as different levels of expertise with science policy interface. What I would like to highlight is that right now, this pilot training is not targeting the science policy interfacers who are already active, have been active for the past years, because they already somehow have made this transformation and they are very knowledgeable. What we want is people who are at the level where, like, they think that it's not working, but this is, you know, the fault of the policymakers, or the ones who are on the policy side and think, what is happening on the science side? It's not working. So we actually start with the ones who are not convinced that the science policy interface is something that they are interested to join, or even think that it's working. I think it will be challenging, but it will be more fun. Just practically, we are going to share a form where people can apply, okay? And we'll have a process. The form will be shared until early June. And then we'll have a process of selection and confirmation to the ones who are selected for the pilot training. Okay, well, I think we are reaching the end of this webinar. We will collect all the questions you have put in the chat and kind of use them as a basis for our frequently asked question on the pilot training. So we have a bit of feedback for the ones who were not with us today. And we'll send you the form for application to the pilot training. I think I would like also to thank all of you who have joined this training, this webinar on the training, so sorry. And maybe we can turn on these webcams, and I would like to hear your voice all in your own native language to say goodbye. So we have a bit of final sharing with goodbye. And thanks.
Goodbye.
Ha det bra.
Merci.
Tot ziens.
Ciao.
Arrivederci.
Bravo.
Do widzenia.
Hasta luego.
Thank you for the meeting.
Merci beaucoup. Thanks a lot.